Real Estate Talk discusses the ins and outs of our local housing industry, sponsored by Keller Williams, Spokane.
Well, hi, folks, and welcome to Real Estate Talk. I am your host, Ken Sachs, and once again, we are coming to you live from our COVID-19 pandemic studios, which are our homes. We are still in our homes, still in lockdown, but the show must go on. So today's show, we have with us a lender, Mr. Tony Byrne with Heritage Home Loans. Tony, why don't you tell us a few things about yourself?
Well, I'm like you said, I'm with Heritage Home Loans, whose main branch is out in the Valley, and my office, have a small office up on Garland. I'm actually there for the first time today in a few months. So yeah, excited to hopefully get back to normal here a little bit, because it has been a little bit crazy, not only in life, but in, trying to close some loans and help people buy houses, et cetera.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thank you again for being here. And, I want to start off my first question. There's been so much information out there all over the board. I am considering buying a house, or I need to buy a house. What the heck is the lending market like today? And can I even get a loan during this time? What are you seeing today?
Well, I think, now it's a little bit easier now than it was, 3 months ago. I think the biggest change now or the most positive thing that's kind of happened is stability kind of seems to be returning, that just when this all started, it was everybody was running to a refinance because rates went down so fast. And so then we had all those people refinancing. So we had just lenders couldn't keep up, capacity issues, all those kind of things. Then this hit. And then we started having program changes because, like the forbearance deal jumped in and, lenders were concerned about liquidity. Are we going to have money to lend the next person down the road? And if they get this loan, are they going to, miss their first? So all those kind of things came about. And that's kind of like things are just kind of starting to settle in. Forbearances are down. The rate market was like, it was moving up and down at a crazy pace, and now it's just kind of level. And so all of those things have kind of gone away. So it's just, when someone enters it, whether it's a refinance or a purchase, you kind of know what you're getting into now for the most part, right? Like most people, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that lost their jobs, but for now, that feels like we're past that a little bit. So we just kind of know what we're getting into, which I think not knowing before is what was creating a lot of the issues.
Sure. And I can relate, and I know realtors around the city, state, and probably nation can relate, because when this thing started, mid-March, third week of March, information was changing literally almost daily as far as in our wheelhouse and what we could do, we couldn't do, and buyers and sellers, and nobody knew what to do, and everybody thought the world was coming to an end, the market was going to crash. None of that really happened. So it sounds like, had I been a buyer maybe 2-3 months ago, it might have been a little unstable, unsure of what I could do or could get. But the dust has settled a little bit, fortunately. So we know what's available, and we know what opportunities are there for buyers. So that's all really, really good news. So I can get a loan today, is what you're saying. It's not going to perhaps be much different than pre-COVID times. Good. So one thing that, we're still in our real estate market is we are still in a state of a, 1 month to 2 months inventory, depending on price range, which means that's a seller's market, which means that there are more buyers than there are homes, which means there are often multiple buyers trying to get the same house. Or in other words, multiple offers. So I'm a buyer, and I've been coached really well by my realtor, and we need to put our best foot forward because, Tony, we could be competing with 2 offers or 20 offers or more. So as a buyer, I want to give the seller the most confidence possible that if that seller picks me, then they can feel confident that I am most likely to be able to perform and close on seller's house. So my question to you, Tony, is what can I do as a buyer to position myself that way with you as a lender so that that seller sees me and picks me when there's like 20 other hands here and I'm standing the tallest saying, pick me, I'll buy your house. What can I do to prepare myself, Tony, for that scenario?
Well, I think you said it right. The first thing a seller is concerned with is if I accept your offer, is this going to close, right?
Yeah, they're taking their house off the market.
Yeah, and so I think that's where, I was having this discussion with one of my clients and the listing agent on their offer the other day, and this client was doing their due diligence and shopping around, and us versus a national outlet. And the listing agent said, "There's no way I'll accept this national outlet's offer," and that's not them steering the buyer towards a certain lender. That's just the listing agent saying, like, I don't trust this lender because I can't go. I can't get them on the phone if I have questions. I don't know this. I don't know this person that my seller or this person I'm working with is pulling their home off the market for in an insane market. So that's kind of the first thing I think that's helped is, me as a lender, also not just the realtor calling, but the lender calling the listing agent saying, like, hey, this is where this is at. This is a solid offer. They have their jobs. They, all of the things they said to me are fact because we've looked those things up with paperwork and all those kind of things. So that being local, I think, helps. I also think you can't, as a buyer, you can't just jump in. You see a home on Zillow or whatever and call someone and say, hey, I want to make an offer. You can't without being pre-approved. You gotta start ahead of time because of all the changes we've gone through in lending. It's not just like you have great credit, here's a loan, go get them.
Right.
Things have changed a little bit. So I think those two things, and then just you obviously have to, whether it's down payment there or you may pay for your own closing costs. You may have to do those or up the offer. There's a lot of different things you could do, but I think being local and being prepared as you head into the process is a big deal.
Yeah, that's good advice, and I'm sure that the listing agent who is stating that they won't accept a national lender, I'm sure that was directed to them from their seller to make that statement, because it would be the seller not accepting whatever terms. And I'm thinking of our purchase and sales agreement and our financing addendum, and I may have talked about this on your show, Tony. There are triggers in our financing addendum for Washington State that, if used properly, gives the seller it entitles the seller, allows the seller and a listing agent and really everybody to follow up on that buyer's lender. So that's a fantastic point you make, Tony, because if my seller and me as a listing agent exercise our duties properly, and we now are able to contact the buyer's lender, will we even be able to actually do that in real world if it's a 1-800-homeloan.com, kind of lender who has a call center somewhere we don't even know? So that's actually a really good point, Tony, to use local, because you need to be able to have those direct lines of communications. And I don't think anything frustrates a realtor more in a transaction, well, there's a lot of things that frustrate us, but one of the key things is we can't get a hold of the lender. The lender's not giving us updates. The lender never answers their phone and never returns our calls, and we don't know what's going on. Meanwhile, my seller's house is off the market, and we're not even sure if buyer has the ability to perform. So point well taken, Tony, to go local. I like that a lot. You just had me thinking here of all the transactions I've been involved in and how to get that buyer to stand out. Another thing you said, and we've talked about it on this show many times, buyers, we always say, talk to a lender as early as possible. Yet what happens is they're out looking for homes and, ooh, we found a house, write an offer. Now I call Tony, hey, I need a loan. And here you are now submitting an offer that day. Buyers, talk to Tony as soon as possible, because in addition to a lot of other things, Tony, I'm going to guess you have the ability, or you will, look at their credit, and then you'll be able to coach them. Hey, here's what you need to do. Pay this off, pay this down. Don't worry about that. Don't do this, so that when the time comes, 30, 60, 90, 180 days, when the buyer is ready to push the button to buy, their score will be at the highest score possible, which ultimately equates to saving them money.
Yep. Yeah. It's, I have my phone here. There we are. It's so easy to look at homes on your phone, right? Like everybody, yes. We all have access to that. And I think one of the things people are running into now is, you see that home and you're like, man, that's the one. But you haven't talked to a lender, and now you can't just go like, I see this house here. I want to go look at it and kind of like see if we want to buy it or whatever. Like, you have hours instead of days to decide if you're going to buy a house. And so, if you have thoughts, and I'm not saying like if you just have the Zillow app on your phone, you should apply for a mortgage. If that crosses your mind more and more often, it maybe worth just having a discussion. Hey, where are we at if this were to happen? No lender is going to hold your feet to the fire and say like, well, you applied, you need to buy within this amount of time. So if you have those thoughts, it's worth reaching out, because again, you have hours instead of days to make a decision on a house.
Yeah, excellent. Tony Byrne, Heritage Home Loans, talking about the state of the market, folks, with regards to lending and buying a house, especially within our kind of new norm, COVID-19. Yeah, I think this kind of stuff, like what we're doing, is going to be a regular thing moving forward virtually here. So good. So I'm a buyer, and maybe it's been 3 years, 4 years since I bought a home. I'm buying a house now. My, wife's pregnant, or we just had a baby. We got to buy another house. And maybe you've mentioned this, and if so, tell me, but are there different restrictions or requirements or guidelines where maybe 3 years ago I didn't have to deal with as a buyer, but now today when I call you and say, Tony, I didn't find a house today, but I'm going to start looking. What do I need to know? What changes, impacts, restrictions as a result of our new reality?
Well, I think probably it's 3 months ago that, if you talk to a lender in January because you were starting the process and the lender said, hey, you're good to go. And then, then this all hit and you back out, right, and you say like, we're going to wait. You need to revisit that whole deal because things have changed. It's the person that's maybe buying a house that's a little bit more than they can afford. Their credits on the, fringy is a term I like to use, just like they're not a slam dunk pre-approval. Those people, 4 months ago, there was ways to work those through. Now it's a little bit harder in that sense. So that's one of the, get ahead of the curve. And if you're having those thoughts, start thinking about it. So, like the first time home buyers have been affected a little bit in terms of down payment assistance. Some lenders are doing them, some aren't. Credit score minimums have risen. It used to be 580 for every lender. Now some lenders are up to 680. We all have it a little bit different,
Okay.
I think those are starting to ease off where maybe most lenders are at 620 now. The jumbo market, in terms of loans, they're not doing lower down payment options. So that, like, there's just all these kind of things and that'll slowly comes back as things continue to be more and more stable. But again, if you started in January and your lender said you're good to go, and you're now, you're back to work and all those kind of things, like, you should be having a discussion and revisiting the process now, because things may have changed.
Okay. And, I just thought of this too, talking about employment and employment history. We probably all know people who were laid off during this time. So now if I'm back at work, are there any restrictions, or what should I know as far as employment history to qualify to get a loan? What are you guys looking for? What's the industry looking for?
Well, I think, obviously, like, you have to have a job, or you have to be employed to be able to get a loan.
Yep.
So if you're furloughed, if you're laid off, if you're all those kind of things, basically kind of the guidance we're getting now is you need to be back to work and have a pay stub.
Okay.
And then for, our office, and I can't speak for how other lenders are doing this, but if you're work in the service industry and you get a lot of tips, we want to see 30 months of tip income just to, know we're kind of back to normal. Now, this is one concern I kind of have moving forward, I think, in this, and not necessarily like next few weeks, but the next year or so. Self-employed people that didn't have the business open, their income is going to be lower, right? Tip income people that didn't, bartenders that didn't
Right.
tend bar for 3 months, that they're not making as much money. So as you kind of head into tax filing next year, I think there's going to be a little bit of I think the effects of this are going to be longer or farther reaching, longer down the road than we maybe think. I don't know for sure. I don't know, that for the most part, there's been some, I guess, some leniency on that kind of stuff, but is that going to be the case next year when hopefully we're past this and there's a vaccine and all
Sure.
those things and there's no more fear?
Okay. So if I got furloughed and now I'm back to work, I'm not concerned about my time in my job now is reset to 0 and I'm 1 month on the job.
No.
It sounds like you guys will count.
Uh-huh.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. That gives me some comfort. Okay, moving on, let's talk about appraisals. That, of course, an appraisal is something that is going to occur to set a value or verify the value of a home before a lender lends money on it. They have to know, hey, I'm lending $200,000. Is the property worth that, or what is it worth? So that's an appraisal. So with regards to appraisal trends, have you seen any kind of trends during this pandemic, this COVID-19, with regards to appraisals? And part 2 of the question, what kind of issues are we seeing, common appraisal issues occurring today?
Well, I think a couple of things I've seen. One, they're starting to take a little bit longer. One, we had that refinance run, right, at the beginning of this. And then all of a sudden, during the middle of that, they couldn't go into houses as much, or people weren't letting them go in. So they're taking a little bit longer. They're also starting to, just the price of them is starting to increase dramatically. So like those two kind of off the bat, like they were about a week and a half, and now they're 2 to 2.5 weeks, which is making that it just extends out a transaction a little bit,
Sure.
And then it makes the transaction a little bit more expensive. I think in terms of, it feels like they're being a little bit less strict on repair stuff. I don't know how long that'll last. I don't know if that, like, that's just more of a feel / opinion than it is a fact. So I think there's been those kind of changes. I think that the market has outpaced appraisals. So we're starting to see more and more come in a little bit low, just because they don't have the comparable properties to deal with what the market is doing. It's tough on them, right? They have a tough job to, when there's 10 offers and like someone legitimately says, I'll pay whatever, $1 million for this house, and it's listed for 250.
Right.
So, but at the same time, like, I think it's good that they have to keep pace with the market, because what we don't want is overvalued homes like we had 10 years back, which we don't have that now because they've been doing a good job with that. So I think at the end of the day, there's slight changes, longer term, and then they're dealing with those challenges. But the market will catch up. That may last a month or so. And so I think that will some of that stuff will work itself out.
Sure. And this is a good transition to my last question, which we have about 2 minutes left. I always say, here's the market, right? This is the market. So when we are in an appreciating market, I always say appraisers, they look out the back window, oh, what did that house sell for? Realtors, we're looking out the front windshield, what can I get? So, I always have this question, and I just closed on a property where I was representing both sides. And as a listing agent, we pushed the value, we pushed it. And I was a little uneasy about if it would get appraised or not. And the appraisal came in, and it literally came in less than $100 over our contract price. So we made it. But my question, Tony, is I'm an appraiser, and I am basing my report on sold comps. But what sold last week and 2 weeks ago is not necessarily the value of the property today in an appreciating market. So how do appraisers account for that appreciation difference when they're doing an appraisal?
Well, they have to account for what happened 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago. That, what I've seen on appraisal reports is the amount of detail they're going into with market stats and all those kind of things. It's easier if you're in the city limits to have a comp or a comparable property. As you start getting out in the outskirts, it becomes harder. So they're maybe going back a little bit further, and on each appraisal they do what's called an adjustment. So they say, like, in this area, a finished bathroom in the basement is worth about this much. This house doesn't have it, so I'm going to subtract that much value, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of how they're doing it. They're using market stats and saying appreciation is doing this much, the market's doing this, this is legitimate. Or it's not, or it's, this buyer just really wanted this house, they overpaid for it. So that, the amount of detail in appraisals in the comments and all the work they're doing is, which is probably why it's costing more.
All right.
Is impressive and helpful. Now, I'm also seeing that like on an FHA appraisal, they can use pendings and listed properties to prove the market is increasing.
Oh.
Not on every appraisal, but to prove that, they can use those as part of their comps. Now, I'm obviously not an appraiser. I've just seen that happen. So again, like, obviously I want to try and stay in my lane and not speak for them, but I've seen that happen. So they're working the best they can. They also, again, if the home's listed for 250 and it sells for $1 million, that doesn't work. They can't just give you that just because, Susie and Johnny Buyer want the house so bad. So they're doing the best they can. I haven't seen a ton of low appraisals. On refinances, it's a mess. Like it's, the appraisal always, Timmy homeowner always thinks his home's worth way more than it is probably. And so those appraisals are always coming in low, which is creating issues in refinances. But we're also, there's also been a little bit more of an avenue for an appraisal waiver on purchases and refinances if you're putting more money down and those kind of things.
Okay, good. So it sounds like appraisers, they can just figure out the approximate rate of appreciation that the market has experienced, and they have some sort of guidelines where they can apply it to the property that they're appraising at that time. So that makes sense. Okay, well, my guest, Tony Byrne, Heritage Home Loans. Tony, we are well out of time, but any closing remarks from you, sir?
Well, I think if you're thinking about mortgaging, whether that's refinance or purchasing, get ahead of it. Just, if you're thinking about it, call and have a discussion. I always say discussions are free. And that will save you money, save you time, save you heartache down the road.
Good, great advice. And buyers, that may be the difference in you getting selected in a multiple offer situation. So folks, thank you again for joining us. Tony, thank you for joining us. And we will see you next time on Real Estate Talk.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by Keller Williams Spokane.